The following discussion and materials are to be used for informational and training purposes only. They are not intended to supplant the requirements of the Assessor's Reference Library, the Colorado Constitution and statutes, and relevant court case law. You should consult and rely upon appropriate legal authority. Welcome to the Colorado Division of Property Taxation's video library. We hope you gain useful information and enjoy our presentation of this course.
All right, welcome to APR 580, Time Trending. This is the half-day course. It's good for 4 hours of CE. And so the BOREA has approved it through that. We've taught it earlier this year at CATA, so 2017 CATA, and in same course basically. What we're going to do in this course, we're going to actually get you guys in some teams so that we have some competition as well as some exchanges of information, make sure we get the content at a deeper level. My name is Ken Beezer. I'll be your instructor. Got the course number. Today is December 14, 2017. Here we are in Golden. So today, what are we here for? Well, we're going to go through providing the basic overview of assessment statistics and really important State Board of Equalization requirements. I want to make sure that you have all that down because reappraisal orders are not fun. They are also not free. And so I want to make sure every county has an understanding of what's required of them statistically for assessment and make sure that they're all on top of that. Also, we're going to introduce time trending techniques. There are 4 primary time trending techniques we'll go through today. And it's the main ones that we use in assessment throughout the state of Colorado. Also, the assessment auditor uses these same 4 potentially. And they give you a few options within them. Then we're going to expose you to the performance evaluation, which is also known as PE. And that process is looking at the backside. Basically, we look at your previous values the assessor has determined. We're going to compare that against the time-adjusted sell prices. We're going to come all the way around and see what the values are specifically of the properties that you've captured within your sales confirmation program. And then we have a ratio that we look at for time trending. On the other side, you have to establish new values for your new reappraisal cycle. And so you're going to use your base rates that are created from all that great information, multiple regression analysis, and all that great information, and you come up with new base rates per class, subclass, substratification, whatever the case may be. You apply that to sold and unsold properties. Then we check those sold properties, and we come up with performance evaluation statistics to see that you are in compliance based on requirements. And so in a nutshell, that's what we're going to cover in the 4 hours today. I like pie. It's holiday season. So remember pie, that's what this is all about. Providing basic information, introducing you to the time trending, all 4 different methods primarily used, and exposing you to performance evaluation or back-end statistics. Talking about statistics, let's get in the mind frame. Percentage of Americans that have test anxiety. What do you guys think? What would you guess? Out of 100%, what would it be?
80, 90.
80, 90? Well, according to this source from 2010, Frank Zappa, 75% according to this source. And so, once again, 2010 could be different. But the main point is, it's constantly changing, and it also depends on the source. If you get bad information, sometimes it's because of where you survey. Sometimes it's because of who you survey or how many. Does it really represent the population you're trying to survey? And so we're assumed that that's correct until we know different. But just kind of bring up statistics and how that works for us. All right. Washington statistics. Washington Post says, we hate math, say 4 in 10, a majority of Americans. You do the base math, 4 in 10 is what, 40%? So that wouldn't add up, would it? So they're obviously trying to make a point and trying to be humorous and get your attention with this type of article. So sometimes it's not really sincere, it's basically just something to get your attention. 90% of statistics are made up 75% of the time. Get in politics, and a lot of people will say even more. So just keep that in mind. So where do we see it? Commonly used locations in life, marketing. When you market anything, they want you to buy a product. They want you to buy a service. And when they're wanting you to purchase, they want to put their best foot forth, their best face on. And to do that, to get you to buy in to their product or their service, they're going to give you all the good stuff and limit the negative. And so always keep that in mind. So marketing, whatever the case may be. One example I saw growing up, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident sugarless gum. Okay. Most dentists say don't chew gum because it has sugar and it's not good for your teeth and it's going to give you cavities. 4 out of 5. So what would that give you? What percentage are we looking at? 80%, right? They're saying 80% of dentists surveyed. Is that really true? Well, not if the surveyed amount was actually 50, and only 4 of those 50 actually said that, and then they may substratify it into the 4 plus 1 to get a better statistic to represent what they were trying to convey. So be careful with marketing. Maybe not 80%, maybe only 8%, but it sounded really good when they limited their surveyed amount. There's another thing we see a lot. That's what I want it to say. That's what I want to say. See if you can find some statistics to prove it. So, swayed. Where other areas do we see that? Marketing plus politics. At all levels, you will see different statistics being handed down. And that's one place we'll stay away from today because there's so many political views and so many interesting political things going on at all levels right now. Economics. When someone wants to represent that they're within budget, years and years ago, state of Colorado decided that to make budget, they would actually move back the payday. So were they within budget? Yes. Was it legal? Depends on who you ask. Was it right, or is it a good thing for the HR and the PR? Depends on who you ask. But it was done, and we still have 2 July paydays and no June paydays for the state of Colorado. Now they're having people on a 2-week cycle that they're trying to go ahead and with excess funds every year where we actually finish with excess funds in the budget, maybe move it back that direction. So, economics. How's the economy doing? Depends on who you ask, depends on the reason you're asking, and so you want to keep that in mind as you go through. Insurance. I haven't had an accident in 7 years, yet my insurance rates went up again because they look at general statistics within the region, within the area, knowing that we have more people now here, increasing the odds that you're going to get in an accident, knowing traffic congestion, look at the other statistics regardless of what you've done personally, and it increases your odds of having an accident, which gives the insurance companies a reason to increase your auto insurance or other insurances. Maybe your neighborhood is very safe. Maybe your home insurance should not go up. But maybe with all the additional housing, additional claims have been filed in your area, they can make a justifiable statistical claim that they're going to increase yours because of the increased risk they're taking by insuring anyone in that area. Government. We all like to look good and put our best face forth, right? Our best foot forth. And what happens? You're going to have different types of statistics coming through. Here's one that you might want to look at, Colorado State Patrol. This was actually in our parking garage at the state, right? Next to the state capitol, between our building and Centennial and the state capitol. Texting while driving increases your crash risk by 300%. Okay. What does that really mean? They probably have some statistics that support that those who are texting constantly versus those that are not have a 3 times more likelihood of getting in an accident because they're not paying attention to the road. But 300% sounds a lot better, isn't it? Right? 3 times more is the same as pretty much 300% of what you would have come across. So they're not lying, but they're magnifying the impact of the statistics. And this is something I think they were taking for a while to different fairs as a part of their PR to make sure people don't text as much. So, main point of that, statistics are useful, but they're a tool. Be wary of the sources. Be wary of behind the scenes reasoning that may skew the data or skew the point. Today we're going to talk about registration. Well, we already got the registration and focus completed. Terms and definitions commonly used in assessment statistics. We're going to further go into statistics that we use, specifically the sales ratio statistics and your median sale ratio. Also looking at your time-adjusted sale prices and information like that. We're also going to look at weighted medians and some other basic statistics. Then we're going to examine that in relation to State Board of Equalization requirements for your sale ratios, as well as your studies conducting your coefficient of dispersion. We're also going to look at the PRD, price-related differential, as another statistic that doesn't make you out of compliance, but gives the auditor a reason to look deeper at specific classes and subclasses of property. And then we're going to examine the 4 commonly used time trending techniques for assessment statistics. Have a little break. Then we're going to get back into where we end off, time trending techniques, make sure we cover all 4 in depth, along with some samples. We'll have some case studies with each of these and have some discussions, and then we'll do a review. During the Q&A, we're actually going to do a Kahoot Q&A where you're going to have a team competition. And hopefully you have at least one phone that has a great connection, because you have to choose that amongst your teams, and there'll be wonderful division prizes. Very valuable. Value is all subjective, right? All right. So moving into our materials. And you'll note, if you want to keep along in the book, I have those posted here when they significantly change. So it'll keep you on the pages that we're talking about for those who like to highlight. So what is statistics? It's defined as the science of collecting, organizing, analyzing, interpreting, and presenting numerical data with the goal of making a more effective decision. That's why I think statistics can be summarized as it's a tool. It's a tool to be used to proactively make sure you're in compliance, but also proactively make sure you have uniformity, level values. And on the other side, it's a back-end check to make sure that your values are in compliance statistically with the state board requirements, as well as that you have great uniformity with new valuations. Some uses that we want to look at on that same page for statistics include the reappraisal process. Sales confirmation. Were any of you in the Tuesday class? Okay. Why do we need sales confirmation? Why is it valuable for mass appraisal and statistics and assessment? That's our base. How do we establish the new values for the next reappraisal cycle? We have to have data. We can't just say, oh, I think that's worth $140,000. That's $500,000. Oh yeah, $600,000 house. You have to add data that shows you information that really supports what you're saying. And so your sales in a great sales confirmation program is constantly ongoing. Sales don't just stop because your reappraisal cycle stops or because you set values. People are buying and selling at all times throughout the year. We have different periods of time that we want to make sure that we capture it, and then we verify. There's non-qualified, and then there's qualified verified. And there's a master transaction list, which is everything. Everything transaction that has happened within each class and subclass of property should be being captured. What types of documents do you have coming through the assessor's office that help you keep up with it? TD 1000?
Yep.
Transfer Declaration 1000 should give you great information. Any time properties change, what happens? The title changes. You talk to the clerk, right? You're in line with the clerk and making sure everything is going appropriately, and they give you the paperwork appropriately. And you should have staff that are focusing on that area to make sure that you capture that as soon as possible. The longer you wait to go back and verify that a sale was qualified, verified, real property only, the less chance you have of making sure that it's actually accurate. Because what happens as you get further away from a sale date, the parties forget about it. Even if it's their brand new first house, eventually they forget when they did what and what was involved. And so the sooner you get it right after that, the better the data is. The better the data, the better your time trending and your performance evaluation statistics will be. Data exploration. Once you get those sales confirmed, verified, and then you disqualify those that really don't meet the definition of a reasonable arm's length transaction, you're going to go ahead and explore it further. Data sitting idle within a filing cabinet gets you nowhere. Immediately exploring that, capturing it, knowing which ones are disqualified, and discerning between the two in those transaction lists is going to help you keep your data sets straight and make sure that you have accurate information that's being fed into your system to come up with reasonable base rates and valuations. Then time trending. As we get closer to the end of the cycle and get to the reappraisal cycle, what are we going to do? We have to check for time. A lot of people say, well, time, what does time really mean? It's market conditions over time based upon what people will and will not pay for specific properties. That changes. It's in the mind of the man, in the mind of the woman, making the transactional adjustment, specifically going out and purchasing or not purchasing for a certain offering price. And so you want to keep that in mind. Time trending is going to help us as a tool to figure out whether trends have showing us that the values are increasing or decreasing or stagnating within a specific market. Setting new 2017 values. Once again, after we look at the time adjustments that are part of the whole equation and coming up with a new market value, we set base rates, and then we have to make those appropriate adjustments to come up with our new values. So our 2017 was the last time we did a reappraisal. And specifically 2019 is the next time we're coming around. And so what we're going to do is look at our best information available, qualified verified sales information, appropriately adjust for time adjusted sell prices, come up with a base rate per class and substratification, how the market is actually operating, and apply those base rates to sold and unsold properties. Then we're going to check those sold properties against our time adjusted sell prices to see if we're in compliance with our performance evaluation. So looking at the back end, saying, okay, we've set new values for solds and unsolds. We've adjusted where necessary. We're going to check those ratios of the adjusted prices, time adjusted sell prices, versus our new set values for those properties, and see if we're in compliance based on our COD, coefficient of dispersion, and our specific sell ratios. And so we'll look at all the data up front and make sure that proactively, before the auditor gets in the office, we are square away with what we're doing. So this is the base process that we're looking at. Happens every day for sales confirmation and every reappraisal cycle. So as you get closer to that even year, June 30th, each year, which we're coming across, 2018, June 30th, you're going to look at that. For the purposes of this class, we're looking at the last reappraisal cycle that we looked at, which was June 30th, 2016 as the appraisal date, and January 1st, 2017 is the new assessment date. So what happens in the intervening year between January 1st, 2017 and January 1st, 2018? What do we do? It's the value as of June 30th, 2016. So as long as we have a good one that worked out throughout the process, it's not going to significantly change, right? If there was an appeal, which can happen, the taxpayers have the right to appeal the value. They get a notice of value. They go through the process. Either you change it in your office, another one of the triers of fact changed it. Could be, they could take it over to, what are the 3 triers of fact above the State Board of Equalization, or the County Board of Equalization? They could go to the Board of Assessment Appeals. They could go to district court,
Or arbitration.
binding arbitration. And whose choice is it? Petitioner, taxpayer representative. And so they get to choose, and sometimes that process takes quite a bit of time, depending on how far they go. Okay, we hope that they get to the trier of fact and maybe that resolves it, or maybe even at your office appeal level, or even at the county board, that any things that aren't sufficiently justified are adjusted appropriately to get the values appropriately corrected, are specifically in line with the rest of the values. So that's another thing that we look at. If I'm looking for time trending at your last set county values for sold properties, that's what you had set them value as of a specific date. That's the last June 30th, 2014. We're comparing that against the actual time period where it sells within the data collection period. And we're basically saying if nothing has changed and you had a good market value here and nothing changed when it sold, it should be pretty close. So regardless of whether you take the previous value versus your value, or your value from the last time you valued it versus the previous value, you should come up with something close to 1 if you're in line with a stagnant market. And that's where the ratio study comes in. So some definitions we need to be aware of to know how good our statistics are. Population and sample. A population is defined as a collection or set of all possible individual cases, objectives, and measures of interest to the collector. A sample is actually defined as a portion or part of any subset of cases selected from that population. So in our world, assessment world, what does that actually mean? What examples can we apply? For a population, we could say it's all single-family residences in Cheyenne County, economic area number 1. So we're limiting it to that's the total population that we're looking at, type of property. And then for our sampling of that population, we could say it's all single-family residences in Cheyenne County, economic area 1, that sold during our data collection period and specify what that time period is. So we have locational and specific time information that is going to help us to narrow down what our sample from our population is. there's an assumption that this sample is representative of the population. Is that always the case in assessment? Can you have a portion of vacant land that really dominates the sales versus your entire county in that economic area? Yeah, and that happens with undeveloped land. It can happen with a demolition kind of situation where you're going to have a previous maybe commercial, industrial mowed down because it's no longer the highest and best use for that property. And so we can't control what happens and the changes that happen, but we can monitor what's going on. Why would changes happen? Why would you develop a vacant land parcel, or why would you mow down and replace a commercial industrial improved property? Not you specifically, anyone who's in the market doing it. Supply and demand. It no longer meets the highest and best use. It's not as productive as possible, and specifically not going to be at its highest value for you as the owner. And so when you see that the market has shifted and that you can maybe change zoning, or within the zoning it's currently legally zoned for, you can just change the use. You look at the difference. How much will it cost for me to do it versus what's the benefit? What will I do with that? So that's another reason that they may shift. And as appraisers, we have to monitor those shifts and see what's going on. Okay, looking at page 2, getting a little deeper in here. Sales ratio and appraisal ratios. We're going to talk about the two different types of ratios we look at. The sales ratio, also known as the AAS ratio, non-inverted, is where we take the assessor's appraised value, and let's look at the 2016 appraisal date, looking at the 2017 assessment date. So our period of time that we're looking at is, what did you value this as? What were these properties that sold in your January 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2016 data collection period? What did you value those the last reappraisal cycle? What do you have in your system as the market value? Okay, that is what we're looking at as the assessor's appraised value, real property only. Dividing that by the sale prices, real property only. So we're getting rid of all the extras that were actually paid, specifically if someone threw a car in or some other type of concession. We want to make sure we're only real property only to real property only, apples to apples. And that is going to give us a non-inverted sale ratio. This is where we're going to start. This is the standard ratio that we look at. Now, the auditor, and for statistical compliance, you need at least 30 or more sales ratios to really run ratio analysis. Statistically speaking, 30 is the number that we need to have at least. What if you have less than 30, but it is still a significant value of property within your county? The auditor still may have to check that. To check that, they may have to do an appraisal ratio. When you don't have 30 or more, or the reasonable amount of sales that have taken place of that type of property, that subclass or class of property, the auditor may actually come in and they'll look at your previous value that you had in your system, and they'll run an independent appraisal of a property that didn't sell as of June 30th, 2016, whatever that appraisal date is. And they'll look at that along with your properties that you had to get up to the number of 30, so it's statistically reasonable, and they can check your statistics that direction. So the difference between a sale ratio and an appraisal ratio is the sale ratio has a sale that has occurred, that you qualified, verified, that's in your system. And that's what your previous value is compared against. Where the assessor appraised value has an independent appraised value, where an appraiser came in with the value of what they thought it would sell for as of the June 30th appraisal date. So you won't see this a lot unless you have a class that's right on the border. Some of the smaller rural counties may have industrial commercial, and they may have 27 sales, 28 sales that have occurred within their 5-year data collection period. And so if you get up close enough to the mid-20s with those sales that are qualified, verified, then the auditor may take that and go ahead and check it. The time they will do that is they'll look at your total class percentage of value across, and they'll see if you need to be able to check. There actually are specific counties, metros, that have to have certain checks done, where some of the rurals, they're given some concessions, understanding that the sales won't always mirror what they need. In this example, sticking to a sale ratio, we have the assessor's value from the previous reappraisal cycle of $100,000 on this property, divided by the sale price, which is something that the market actually determined for real property only. What they paid was $80,000. So you take the assessor value, $100,000, divided by the sell price for real property only $80,000, and it's 1.25 is the ratio. Another sale occurred in the same market. The assessor also had that same similar sale for $100,000 valued in their system from the previous reappraisal cycle. They divide by that by the sale price of $120,000, and it's 0.83333 continuous. In a perfect world, what you have in your system in a stagnant market mirrors what someone paid for it. And it's a perfect 1.0. Why do I show that to you? Because one of the reasons that the previous auditor and the current auditor allow or have checked county systems against inverted versus non-inverted ratios is because it didn't make a lot of cognitive sense when they looked at the charts and the graphs. So one thing is basically, if you look at your non-inverted ratio, which we just looked at the formulas for, and you graph it over time, in an increase in market, that red line would represent an increase in market. Does that look like it's an increase in market? It's counterintuitive to basically say that a graph showing a downward line is increasing, and then the green line is a decrease in market. And the blue is a nice stagnant market. And so what we're basically saying is they looked at the graph, they looked at the information, and they even looked at the basic ratios and how they look over time. And they were coming up with some things that didn't seem really as rational. And so they decided to do what we call flip the ratio. So we call it the inverted sell ratio. It's the sell price from the market that we captured within our sales confirmation program, real property only, divided by the assessor's appraised value, and we come up specifically with basically flipping that ratio. So if we look at it this way, it's the sell price divided by the assessor's value. That same $20,000 and that same relationship is now 0.8. Which before was 1.25. So it's about 20% difference. When we look at the sale price, flipping the other ratio of 120,000 divided by the actual value of 100,000, it's now 1.2, still about 20%. So there brings up an argument as to which is more accurate and which is more skewed. So when we look at this, now when we flip the ratio and now have an inverted ratio, this green line now represents increase in values. The red line now represents decrease in values, and the blue line is still stagnation. And so that's another reason that was justifiably given when Rocky Mountain Valuation took over the audit about 6 years ago. Well, it's probably about 4 or 5 reappraisal cycles ago. And then now we have, we have Wild Rose, I think, for 3 reappraisal cycles, maybe 4. So that's where we're at. So that's some of the logic. Now, which is better? Depends on who you ask. Depends on their experience with those. I talked to one of the appraisers who teaches in-depth statistics from Arizona, and he's taught a few classes out here, and he basically said he doesn't stick to one or the other. Depends on what his client wants, and when he works with the county, he asks them what they do, and he does it. Right now, the current auditor, Wild Rose, will allow you to do whatever, but you have to use a reasonable, statistically proven, and acceptable method. And as long as you use any one of those and you're consistent, they're okay with it. You can't choose and pick. You can't decide to invert one class and not invert the other class and da-da. They want consistency with the methodology that you choose. And I think that's reasonable. You don't want to just do all the different methods and techniques and decide which one is where you want it. You want to read the market most effectively and apply it. So some of the measures we're looking at is the median sell ratio. There's more than one measure of central tendency that we can look at. The median sell ratio is the primary method and a measure that we're going to use for assessment statistics in Colorado. We'll talk a little bit more about the differences in a couple seconds here. The median sell ratio is needed for the coefficient of dispersion, which is our measure of uniformity, also known as the variability or quality. What's part of the Colorado Constitution that we have to abide by within assessment statistics in Colorado and assessment in general? Uniformity and equalization, right? And this is right in line. It's a form of uniformity verification that we want to keep in mind. And then last but not least, we're not actually measured on this, but this is something that can point out flaws or problems with our system. The price-related differential, or the PRD. is going to help us tell us whether the high-valued properties versus low-valued properties in a specific class and economic area are in line, or if there's something amiss. So we'll talk about each of these a little bit more in depth. So measures the central tendency. The median is also known as the midpoint. It's where you simply line up your numbers, your ratios, whatever you're actually examining, from the lowest to the highest numerically, or the highest to the lowest. And if it's an even number of numbers, you get the two right in the middle after you array them. If it's an odd number, it's the one right in the dab in the middle, once you've arrayed high to low or low to high. So it's simple to look at. So what's the benefit to looking at that type of ratio, or that type of number, or even value? It discounts the outliers. The extreme outliers aren't felt, where a mean or an average, you're going to feel the weight of a higher or lower valued property. But in this specific case, the midpoint ignores those, and it'll just go right to the middle, regardless of what the high or the low and how extreme they are away from each other. The mean or the average is where you add them all up together, all your numbers, all your ratios. You divide by the number of numbers, and it's simple average, just like your GPAs in high school and college were. All right? You add up the numbers, divide by the number of numbers, it gives you a final number. Now, the weighted mean is more like your end result in high school or in college, where you can't just give everything even credit. You had a 4-hour class, you had a 3-hour class, you had a 1-hour class. They don't get even credit. They're not all given that same way. You're going to weigh them by the amount of value that they have within each of them. So we look at the median for our sales ratio analysis. It also forms a part of the COD, or coefficient of dispersion, for uniformity. We also look, but we use the mean and the weighted mean to go ahead and help us establish our price-related differential. That's why we go a little more in-depth on these in here. So we have an example on page 4 in your book. So calculate the median sell ratio for each of the sample, each sample below. We have sample A and sample B of these ratios. And if you look at them, there's an even number of 10 in both of them. They have the same extreme outliers. 0.1 as a low, 2.0 as a high. So we go in the middle, the 5th and the 6th of a data set of 10. We're going to add these together and divide by 2 to get the right middle number with an even number of numbers. So when you do that mathematical equation, we see that from the eye's perspective, you would look at which one's more consistent. Well, sample B is, right? Versus sample A. And then it's confirmed by doing our basic statistics. Sample B has a 1 as the median sell ratio, where you have 1.05. So the further you get away from 1, the less consistent, or the further you get away from the median, the less consistent it is. So in this case, we would say that from our eye view as well as from our statistical view, B is a better sampling, a more consistent sampling, less extremes that we have to worry about. Other measures of appraisal uniformity we need to be aware of: the average absolute deviation, or AAD, and the coefficient of dispersion, the COD. The average absolute deviation measures the average spread or difference between each ratio and the median ratio. Once again, important you get the median ratio right, because it's all relative. But it actually measures the absolute amount, meaning it doesn't matter about if it's higher or lower. It's the total difference between that and the actual median. Also, it doesn't give you a percentage term, so it's all specific to that median sell ratio. The reason we use COD, or coefficient of dispersion, versus this is because it's more relative. Specifically, it's more percentage-based, and we'll look at that formula to kind of show you that information. So major drawback for the average absolute deviation is it measures the average spread or difference between each ratio and the median ratio in raw amounts rather than relative terms. Okay, so it's not looking at a percentage, it's looking at this number versus that specific median. Where when we get the COD, it's going to be a percentage amount that you can take and compare across classes and subclasses. Average absolute deviations cannot be compared between property groups unless the measures of central tendency, or the median sell ratio, are similar. The coefficient of dispersion, or the COD, is the most used measure It's the one we focus on because of state board requirements. It's based on the average absolute deviation, but the 100%, 100 here actually puts it into percentage terms. So we can measure COD, coefficient of dispersion, is equal to the average absolute deviation divided by the median cell ratio for the set of data we're looking at, times 100, which once again then makes it less specific to this median and more percentage based. So we can compare them across classes and subclasses, even if they don't have the same median cell ratio. There's an example in your book on page 5. So we have our formula up here. The coefficient of dispersion is the average absolute deviation divided by the median cell ratio times 100. So what we're going to do is line up all of our assessors' appraised values for these properties that sold within our data collection period. We're going to take those sale prices that they sold for, real property only. We're going to go ahead and do the base math. So if you take 85,000 divided by 125,000, it's approximately 0.68. We're going to do that for each of these sales that occurred. Assessor value divided by the sale price, okay? And it gives us a ratio. So the median cell ratio right here, we're gonna have to line them up from low to high. How convenient, huh? Low to high. So how we get the median? We're gonna say there's 8 of these. It's an even number of numbers. We go to the 2 in the middle. There's gonna be 4 and the 5. Come across here. You add these together, 0.1 plus 0.98, right? And you divide it by the number of numbers included, which is 2. So our median cell ratio for this data set is 0.99. Now we need to get the average absolute deviation. What does that mean? Average means, it's going to be like the mean. So the average, add up all the numbers, divide by the number of numbers. Absolute means don't worry about the sign. Doesn't matter if it's higher or lower than the median cell ratio. It does not matter. What's the difference? Add up all the differences. And then we're going to go ahead and see and that's what deviation is, the difference. So all we do here is we take the 0.68. What was our median? 0.99, right? So 0.68 minus 0.99. 0.980 minus 0.99. So 0.99, put minus 0.99 all the way right here. That gives you the differences. Notice there's no positive or negative here. Okay? And then you add up all the absolute differences. Okay? And then you're going to divide that by the number of numbers. So the average absolute deviation is 1.29 divided by the number of numbers of 8 gives us 0.16. So now we just simply plug and chug to get the COD, coefficient of dispersion. We take the 0.16 average absolute deviation divided by the median cell ratio of 0.99, and then we multiply by 100 within the formula to make it percentage terms. So it's 16.16. Is that a good COD? Is that good uniformity? We haven't gotten into the state board requirements. The higher the number, the further away from 1, the less uniform it is. If this is commercial industrial, you're in compliance. If this is residential, you're having problems. 15.99 or less is the requirements, which we're going to get into at the end of this chapter, for residential property. So if you classify residential, those have to come into compliance with that type of COD. But you have 20.99 or less for commercial, industrial, anything that's not residential that you're checking. So coefficient of dispersion, any questions?
Yeah. Could you go back to that slide, please?
Yeah.
We've only got 8 data points there, 8 sales.
Yeah.
Is this a case where you could use this?
You can always use it, but you would not apply it to this because you need at least 30 for statistical reasonableness.
But suppose that's all you have.
You should check it, but it's not something, if this is the few sales you'd have, like commercial industrial within your county, you should use it internally, but you would not be required by the state board to go ahead and measure that. Yeah, this is more for simplicity than it is for actual assessment statistics, just to kind of show you the concepts. And then we magnify it by 450 or whatever your sales are. And hopefully we still get a nice, something semi-neat that you can go through. But the great thing about it is those outlier ratios, those are the extreme highs and lows, it helps you focus your limited resources. Because our staffs, we have limited resources, human and data, everything we have is limited. So you can focus those limited resources upon the outliers initially and work your way in to see if there's any things that need to be disqualified or some information that's incorrect. Yes?
Let me ask, So in commercial, it's hard to come up with that number. I mean, so in the metro area, for instance, are you allowed as part of that to also consider your out-of-county sales that are helping guide value, or is it strictly what's sold in your county during the study period?
You're always supposed to stay within your boundaries as much as possible because that's really what you know and you get the data on.
Right.
If worst comes to worst, there have been times where counties have been allowed to go to comparable counties that are on their borders that have comparable markets. But then you have to prove with appraisal information that they truly are comparable. More than likely, what would happen is an assessment ratio. You'd actually have an appraisal ratio used in lieu of if you have enough that are on that borderline. But internally, whatever you do to get your right values, you do. So if you trust the data, if you think it helps you verify, then that's something you can do internally. Something you'd put into your actual confirmation program. You'd have to make sure that it's something that's required.
Okay.
But it's a tool. So as long as you use it as a tool to get the best values, that's what we would advertise. Okay. So COD. Low CODs of 15.0 or less is good appraisal uniformity. And why do we have a low COD of 15.99 or less allowed for residential versus commercial industrial? They're more homogeneous, more similar types of properties. Even multifamily has more similarities than you usually have in industrial commercial, which have various sizes, various uses, and so forth. And so you're going to have a little more leeway given. One thing I learned a couple of years ago, there's a red book published by the International Association of Assessing Officers, IAAO, and they actually advertised that for homogeneous properties like residential, they would recommend 15.0 or less. And for commercial industrial vacant land, they'd recommend 20 or less. So the state board in 1992 actually authorized, and since 92, that their statistics would require 0.99 more. So they give you a little more leeway to slide in there. So additional information here, subdivisions with developer lot prices. This is some of the reasons you might have low CODs of 5 or less. They're rare, even in homogeneous properties like single-family residential. But if you have a new subdivision and they have lot restricted prices, vacant lot, they may offer that, and the market may just buy it at whatever it's offered for. And in those cases, you may have enough sales that really give you a COD that's pretty tight. Extremely homogeneous properties, so anything like residential, specific HOA kind of condos, townhomes, those types of things where there's a going rate, brand new subdivision opens up, and that's what people pay if they want it. And so they buy it while it's hot, but they buy it while it's not too expensive. And so you may see that type of thing. Same appraisal manuals and procedures, things like personal property. If you get the data and you use the same tables appropriately for the properly, then you should actually have similar values as to what the tables would show. And then appraisals adjusted to match sale prices. This is the one you don't want to do. That's why it's in red. We call it chasing or cooking sales. It's where you check your numbers, you check your statistics, and you're out of compliance. And so you kind of skew and maybe move some previous values to where they weren't. Or on the other side, you maybe make some adjustments to the sale prices that really weren't warranted. The market didn't dictate that, but if I go a little 2,000 less, it puts my ratio a little bit closer. So you don't want to skew the data. You want to read the market, you want to capture the market, you want to get real property only, and you want to make sure your last values, if they were approved, didn't get appealed, that's your market value for that sold property until further notice. What else can happen on the other side that's out of your control? When you have an appeal on a real piece of real property, you hold to your value if that's the best information you have. You may lose it. You lose your appeal. So your value is no longer what you started with from your last mass appraisal, an MRA. It is now what a board or what the courts or someone else has dictated. But that is the value you have to start with. PRD, which is our last and final one we're going to look at, which measures assessment or appraisal bias, price-related differential. It's a statistic for measuring assessment bias. Comes out as regressivity or progressivity. The PRD base formula is the median cell ratio for the data set divided by the weighted mean cell ratio, and it'll give you your estimation and information. Another reason why we do still look at the mean or the average ratios and the weighted mean ratios. So here's what it'll tell you once you do your price-related differential. What you're shooting for, hopefully, is between 0.98 and 1.03, which gives you an indication that low and high valued properties within the same class or subclass are equally appraised and uniform. Doesn't favor either. There's no apparent bias. This is just a natural range that they gravitate toward. You're not always going to have one. When you have a less than 0.98, the high valued properties are overappraised compared to the low valued properties, so it's favoring the low value properties, and because the high value is picking up the bigger burden, and it's known as a progressive type of bias. And last but not least, this is the one I've seen more than not when I have a PRD that's out of compliance. More than 1.03, high value properties are being underappraised, and high value properties are being favored because they're not bearing their burden of the value and of the taxation. And that's known as a regressive type of bias. You don't want any bias in a perfect world. You're going to be within this. But why would you potentially slide into one of these other categories, even if you don't taint it purposefully? Smaller data sets. Smaller data sets may be less representative of your entire grouping, and they may lead you to slide into one of these high-valued versus low-valued. What if mostly the high-valued properties is what you got? That's what sold in the last data collection period that were qualified verified, or the low-valued. That may be more representative of where your market goes, and therefore it may skew one or the other. If you're out of compliance, you're not required to be in compliance for this. It makes the auditor have a place to look and makes you proactively have a place to look. So if your PRD is in one of these, either progressive or regressive, you want to take a second look with your limited resources prior to finalizing your valuation. And the auditor may actually come and ask you about it and maybe take a deeper look if you don't. So economic area. We want to define our economic areas because we have stratifications we need to be aware of. It's a geographical area, typically encompassing a group of neighborhoods. Now, are neighborhoods always the same class or subclass of property? No. Neighborhoods are supporting and supplemental. They're complementary. So you can have an industrial commercial, and you can have a retail, which would be industrial commercial, vacant land, which is still in the process of being developed, and you can have residential all in the same economic area. It's defined on the basis that the properties within its boundaries are equally subject to one or more of the economic forces. Remember back from APR 105 with the principles and APR 106, which is basic appraisal procedures? We talk about PEGs a lot. The forces that we talk about, forces that help us establish what the economic areas are that we have to consider, are physical, environmental, economic, governmental, and social. And those help us make sure those stratifications are made appropriately. State board requirements, very important, so we want to make sure we note these. It must be stratified by economic areas. The county should be. The county's should have a physical map denoting the economic areas, and must be able to identify each property into an economic area. What if a smaller rural county only has 4 economic areas? But they have one that's on the other side of the county. Maybe they have vacant land all around the edges of their county. And they have, on the north side, they have some vacant land, and then maybe they have a commercial development, or maybe a natural barrier, maybe something like a river or a lake, or maybe a man-made break, like maybe a natural, maybe you have like government land that isn't something you'd capture. They can't have breaks. They don't always have to be connected for the same economic area. Because what is an economic area? It's a region and properties that are acting with the same market participants, similar market participants, similar markets being developed and used. And so there are some counties that we've recommended they combine their vacant land, which may have 3 separate economic areas, into one. Why? Because if I'm a market participant, I step out there, they are not significantly different in my eyes. How do I know? Sales confirmation program, showing you the base rates that are being paid on a consistent basis in the same data collection period. We've also had commercial where it's not been stratified enough. Okay, commercial, just because commercial and you love your one area, if you have a hub and then you have some minor commercial locations, they may not be in the same market. Quick question, if I'm in Grand Junction, do you think that's the same market as Palisade, which is over on the western slope too? If I were a commercial buyer coming in, would I see them the same? In Denver, is Denver the same as Arapahoe or Aurora? You know, the cities may be different. I know they're different counties in this case, but the cities may be different and may have a different appeal. So you have to almost step back outside of your appraiser mode and really look as a potential buyer and market participant and see what they're doing, and then read the sales and the transactions that take place and see what's going on to verify. Sales ratio per sample must include at least 30 sales ratios per economic area. If insufficient sales exist, you must collapse and combine until you have at least that 30. Once again, if you can't control where all your sales occur. So if you're a smaller county, a rural county, you have to work with the auditor or even work with us proactively to figure out the best way to move forward with checking your statistics and coming up with your time trends and seeing if they're valid or not. Additional requirements, these are some of the ones we talked about. For residential classified property, your median sale ratio has to be between 0.95 and 1.05. Your coefficient of dispersion has to be 15.99 or less based on state board requirements. For commercial industrial vacant, your median sale ratio is similar. It's 0.95 to 1.05, same range. Your coefficient of dispersion, though uniformity, can be 20.99 or less. So it has a little bit more leeway on the edge of that. So how can the county fail the audit? Something we're all asking, right? Not something you want to do, but something you want to dodge, right? You want to make sure that your uniform values and you have equal values for all your taxpayers with similar properties throughout the state. So the level of assessment, your median sale ratio, if it doesn't comply based on the class of property you have, and once again, it's not going to be substratification checked. It's going to be your total, all residential. It's going to be all vacant land. It's going to be looking all industrial commercial. Okay, so that's where the final statistical checks will come from, not just your one or two. But you do want to adjust where the market is taking place at the lowest substratifications to get to the final reasonable valuation that you can stand behind. Uniformity, the coefficient of dispersion, if that doesn't meet the requirements based on the classification, you can also get a reappraisal order on those classes of property. Level and uniformity, so appraisal ratio studies in general, if one or both are not in compliance, then you can get it based upon that. And these are all statistical requirements and statistical reappraisal order based. Procedurally speaking, if the audit shows the reappraisal is not consistent with Colorado Constitution or statutes, procedurally speaking, you're doing something completely incorrect, they can order that. Let's say personal property. Let's say they go in, they see that you're not actually getting any information, you're just kind of winging it and just pulling numbers out the air, and you're not applying the division's published tables that are provided and required. You could get a personal property reappraisal order, procedurally not doing it correctly. Some special notes, not in your book as well. The independent auditor may recommend a reappraisal order. The Division of Property Taxation may recommend a reappraisal order. The State Board of Equalization is the only one that can issue the reappraisal order. So that's who they would recommend it to. And the last 3 reappraisal cycles, I believe we've had 2 counties in each that have had reappraisal orders. Negatives, not good PR. Right now we have 64 Colorado counties. 2 are appointed, which is politically appointed. The other 62 are politically elected. So it's not very good PR when you're costing your county money. So it's pretty easy for someone to come in and challenge someone if that's not coming in. Also, when you do that, you then have to contract with either the division or you have to contract with an independent company to try to help you get those back in order. One of the things that is unique and is a nice part of it is if you have to have a reappraisal, there is a part of it that will allow if you let the division help you out, whatever our costs are, or not, it used to be the Bledsoe rule, now it's actually, I think, statutory, and it allows you to go ahead and take whatever funds we would ask for reimbursement and actually use it to put into your equipment and other things to make sure that you don't get another one the next reappraisal cycle. So there is a benefit, but that's not something we want to shoot for. It's kind of like the Broncos. They got 3 games left, right? Should they lose them or win them? You always want to win. Come on. Draft picks don't matter. Move it forward. They don't want the hammer. You don't want the hammer of the state board making you get a reappraisal order. Are you still with me? This is the time to talk about some questions on the base statistics that we covered. Any specific questions that you would have? Okay. If not, we will take a break. Let's go ahead and take a 20-minute break. So how close to the truth do you want to come, sir? We don't want that, right? We want the truth. We can handle the truth. We want to keep it, right? So we don't want that. So let's talk about trends. When we're looking at trends, what's the next set of numbers that would complete this trend? If you think you have it, let me know. What would you put? So what would be right here? And think about why. It's not always transparent, but it's something that we're going to look at within our trends, within our patterns that we look at for our sales ratios, specifically looking at our base rates and whether they're appropriate. Okay, anyone want to tell me what you think the next number will be? What will it start off with?
1.
New. Oh, 1, you're right. Who said that? Well, I was looking at the wrong number. So 1, that's 1, 3. It's just describing with numbers the line above it. It's 1, 3, 1, 1, 2, 2s, 2, 1s. And if you go down, you'll see the same thing. That's 1, 1, 2 1s, 1, 2, and 1, 1. So it's just reading the number, making a number below to tell you what is above. You guys get the trend? See what we're doing? So the trend is that there's a system to it. Though it looks like madness, there's method in it. And that is the method, is you have to establish and understand what's going on. You don't always control it, but in sales, you have to actually read what the market is doing. To be a market participant, what do you have to do? What do you have to have? You have to have the cash or the access to the funding. And if someone says, Ken, I have an awesome deal on a house that's going for $1.2 million over in Cherry Creek North, I'd be like, that's nice. But I don't have the financing, I don't have the credit, I don't have what's necessary, so I cannot be a market participant because I don't meet the criteria of being able to access the funds or the credit to be able to do that. So am I a market participant in that type of home? Probably not. So that's why I look more in the range that I can afford. And so the market is dictated by those people who not only buy, but those who interact and potentially move that market. So 4 basic time trending techniques that we're going to discuss. On page 1 of section 2. Why did I get in that? Oh, okay, we're going to talk about the 4 basic time trending techniques. I thought I had it right there. But basically what we're going to talk about is we're going to look at sales ratio analysis, specifically looking at resales, looking at comparable sales, so best information. We're going to look at specifically linear regression or specific simple single regression. And then we're going to look at multiple regression analysis. Those are the 4 that we'll get into. In Colorado, time trending is important. First, Colorado statutes require uniform equalization and that you consider any adjustments that are necessary, including time, as you come up with your new base rates and your valuation. Secondarily, generally accepted, not accounting, generally accepted appraisal requires that you look at the best market information that you can, that you use your sales confirmation program to capture really what the market is doing. And so you have to look at time trending and any increases or decreases in value that are going on throughout your various classes and subclasses of markets as influencing your base valuation. So market conditions. We're not measuring time as a value, we're measuring market conditions over time and how they're changing one way or the other. They can change due to inflation or deflation. That can be right from the dollar, your dollar value, either have more purchasing power or less, all the way to what the markets are actually doing, people paying more or less for certain types of property. In addition, investors changing perceptions of markets and of properties and of what the market's doing. The real estate market is a market, just like the stock market. People have to take a risk. There's a risk return to every investment that you make. Because if you're not investing in this or you're investing in something else, what's the opportunity cost that you're suffering by letting your money sit idle in a bank account or by trying to take a risk and investing in commercial industrial in a specific location or a residence where you have value in use and value in exchange. So you have to weigh that out. If you have the funding, you don't want to sit idle on funding. You don't want to sit idle on money because there's lost potential. And so there's constantly investors in all the markets, from the stock market all the way down to the real estate market. A lot of times in tough times, does the real estate market a more solid investment, or is it a less solid investment than the stock market? More, because you got a physical property that's right there that you can wait. And usually within 10 to 15 years, you're going to have a turnaround in the market. We're actually due, in my opinion, from monitoring what's going on in the state of Colorado, for another dip. We don't know how deep the dip will be, but there is a dip that's due. Every 9 to 10 years, there's a cycle that's been flipping around. I've been monitoring this since '98. I've been involved in all the different time trending assistance that we've had since '97. And one thing I have noticed is it is the 9-10 year trend that you're seeing. But if you hold on to a piece of real estate, it's still physically there, even beyond when you have a downturn and an upswing. Time is not the cause of the adjustment. It's specifically the market perceptions and what they're willing to pay or not pay for properties and classes of property over an amount of time. Also, inflation, your value and devalue of your dollar and what's able to purchase. The rates of change in real estate often vary with the type of property, which are use, or the geographical area or the location. So one of the things we look at every January 1st assessment date for real property, the use helps dictate the classification, and the location helps dictate the economic area. And so those are very important as to which base rate they get for the next valuation, as well as when you're collecting the sales, which specific data collection and which specific economic area it's included with for the sales that take place in that economic area. So those are two of the things we definitely look at every January 1st to see if those have shifted significantly from properties that are selling in our markets. Economic area, once again, geographical area encompassing a group of neighborhoods. Don't have to be the same class or use within the neighborhoods. They can be supportive and complementary. Defined on the basis that the properties within its boundaries are equally subject to a set of one or more of the economic forces. So that's PEGs once again: physical, environmental, economic, governmental, and social. So the time trending techniques that we're going to go over today, including examples and pros and cons of each: paired sales, property resales, sales ratio trend analysis, and multiple regression analysis, or MRA. Some commonly used terms we're going to talk about, or the most commonly used techniques out of the four, include sale ratio trend analysis and multiple regression analysis. And why do we use these in mass appraisal more than a single appraiser would use it in the fee world? Because we have the data. Our sales confirmation should be capturing that data. We're confident within our sales confirmation program, it's going to give us the best information available, and we're going to use that best information to come up with a value. If we don't have enough sales, like we were talking at break, Brian and I were talking a little bit about that, you may have to go outside of an economic area to another comparable property. You may even have to go outside your county boundaries eventually, but usually it's in an appeal that you'll go that far. You're going to use your best information available until it gets to a point where that taxpayer brings in additional information, because you have limited resources to really do that extra work. You already are balancing out enough. You want the best information you can available to come up with your base rates, to justify where you're at, But then if you get additional information that shows you something's off, you can utilize that information anywhere within the appeal process or anywhere you encounter it to make adjustments to the property values. But once again, the timing is important. And you're not looking for that, you're looking for all the best information when you're doing your data collection and applying that right up front. But if you do come across that in an appeal process, depending on when it is, you want to make sure you keep it in mind as you value comparable properties.
It also speaks to the purpose of the appraisal, because for fee appraisal on a residential property, they're going to use sales that are most recent.
Yes.
And typically don't require time trending because there are certain rules around that are different from what we do in ad valorem appraisals.
That's true. A lot of fee appraisers, they're not stuck to June 30th of the even year prior. They're stuck to a specific appraisal date where they're going to get the value, and they do want to get the sales that are most comparable, closest to the actual appraisal date. With us, we are given a date we have to go to, and we're given a data collection period of at least 18 months prior to the appraisal date, going back as far as 5 years, and that's the data we can look at. If there is something that closes within the data collection period, but you see the transaction officially closes outside, if it's in an appeal, you can consider it, but not initially. If it's an appeal and they provide the documentation showing you that it did in fact close outside or closed within, or the meeting of the minds occurred within the data collection period, though the official final transaction was outside, that can be used in an appeal basis based on case law. So in paired sales, easy way to think about it, it's not apples to oranges. It's not mansions to shacks. It's pairs to pairs, paired sale, boom. So it should be something that's comparable, and that's really what we're looking at. Is it something that's truly comparable to the other property? Does it have to be exact? No, because it's not physically exactly in the same location. Even if it's in the same subdivision, it's not physically in the same place, facing exactly the same way toward the sun. I'm actually renting within my neighborhood, and if I buy in there eventually, one of the things I keep thinking about, like mornings like today where there's snow every so often, I looked across, there was no snow on the other side of the street, but I had like 1.5 inches. So that may be a consideration that the market takes into, this side of the street versus that side of the street in the same subdivision. So that could be a difference, and maybe it looks like a paired sale analysis, but maybe there's a significant difference. The market will pay more or less based on which side it faces, or maybe which is it a corner lot versus an inner lot. So we have to think about things like that as appraisers, specifically if it does influence the market and we have enough sales that dictate and show us that that's what the market is doing. So paired sales are the most comparable properties you can see with appropriate adjustments so that it's only real property only for the sold properties. What's interesting about this used to be one of my best pictures that I'd show. I was driving down Lincoln the other day. I noticed they scraped all 3 of these. This is on Lincoln, really close to I think it's probably like 8th, 9th Lincoln. Okay, it's on the east side. And there's a vacant lot over here, and then there's 3 multifamily, and it's right on a busy thoroughfare. And it seems like the highest and best use is no longer residential. So I'm predicting that this may become an industrial or commercial retail, is what I'm seeing all around it. So maybe that's what they dictate is the highest and best use is no longer the residential to uphold it, but all these are no longer there. Initially, I did this as a paired cell analysis to show you that they were comparable. They may have different living areas. Maybe they have a little extra floor or whatever the case may be, and they had a vacant lot over here. So they could get the vacant land valuation if this sold, and they could look at any one of these to help kind of measure what the base rate should be, what the base valuation and adjustment should be. And so I'm curious. I should probably look in Denver and see what actually happened as far as this property. And I know they scraped it, and I saw a fence around it that is indicating, I think, of retail is what they're going to be building, combining lots and maybe putting up retail. So highest and best use will dictate what the market will pay for, but also what specifically use is appropriate. So you need at least 2 or more qualified, verified sales of comparable properties, the sale date of each of the properties. So for paired sales analysis is on page 4 of section 2, if you're following along in the book. You have to collect the information constantly through your sales confirmation program. You're collecting all the sales that occur throughout your county. You need 2 or more comparable property sales. You need to make adjustments to the most recent sale prices to account for any physical characteristic differences that the market is recognizing. Not that you would pay more or less for, that you know the market is showing that they pay more or less for. Array the adjusted sale prices from oldest date to the most current date of sale, and then determine the common unit of comparison. In case of residential, what's usually the common unit of comparison? Square feet, size and square feet in general. How about for industrial warehouse? Many times it's going to be cubic. How about retail? Front foot. So those are typical types of things. How about for a vacant lot? Depends on how big, right? Could be acreage, could be, you know, different types of measurement on specifically on the vacant land. So you have to go with what's appropriate specifically to the class, type of property, the use of the property, and what the market is looking at. Market participants are saying. Common unit comparison. Then you're going to calculate the actual dollar per unit and percent change per month between each sale. You're going to divide the percent change by the amount of months between each of the sales so that you can get an appropriate unit. And then array the monthly percent change from low to high, selecting the appropriate percent change per month. Now, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't help, right? Let's go into an actual example. Because we can talk about it all day or we can actually apply it. This is a vacant lot example that's in your book. It's on page 5 of section 2. So here's what we have. We have 4 sales that have taken place within going back from June 30th, 2016 as our appraisal date. So we can go back up to 5 years. So they've taken place quite a bit going back, but these are our best, most comparable in the same subdivision sales. So we're going to record the date of sale for the real property. We're going to record the unit of comparison, which is square feet, parcel size that we're looking at here. And then we're going to break it down to a unit of comparison basis, sale price dollars per square foot. So we're going to take that $13,000 price that was paid, we're going to divide it by the unit comparison, 8,000 square feet, and we come up with $1.63 per square foot. And we're going to do that for each of the parcels that sold within our data collection period so that we have a comparable unit of comparison for these comparable properties. So when we look at our array, we're going to make sure it's low to high, high to low. In this case, it's high to low. And happens to be in the same line as the dates. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have it go a little flip-flop or jump up. So what we have here now is between 163 and 136 per square foot, dollar per square foot. So when we're going to look at each of these, we're going to have to break them apart, going in time from the most furthest back to the most recent. But we're going to look at the ones that are closest together as paired sales. So when we look at this, the difference between the dollar amount between the two is 163 minus 146, which is 17 cents negative. Okay? And then we're going to take that number and we're going to look at the number of months that have passed between the two. So we have, there's 2 years here, right? So 2 years is what, 24 months? And then the difference here is 6 additional months. Okay? So 24 plus 6 is 30 months. So we take the amount of difference, because we take our original amount, the difference is 17 cents negative, divided by the original earliest amount, gives us our amount of change, divided by the number of months gives us the amount per month change. If you want to make a percentage, you multiply by 100. So basically it's 0.35% per month, negative, is what this cell would tell us. Then we go to the next one. We take that and we examine the one in the middle, and what's the difference between these two? If you look at the difference in the per unit sale price, 146 minus 140, it's 6 cents negative. Then we're going to look at the difference in the amount of time. The difference is a year and 1 month, right? Which is 13 months. And then we're going to go ahead and take the amount of difference, we're going to take the change, percent change, which is negative 0.06 divided by the original number, which is 146, come with the amount of change, negative 0.0411, divided by the number of months that passed, gives us 13 months. So this is also, conveniently for this example, negative 0.032 per month, or negative 0.32% decreasing per month. We can go to the last set, since we have these cells, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. What's the difference in our unit of comparison? Per dollar price per square foot. That's 4 cents. And then we're negative, and then we're going to look at the difference in the dates. Uh-oh, not exactly a year, is it? So instead, we're going to go ahead and say, well, it's less than a year. So I usually know there's less than 12 months. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to take the difference between this. So 8, how many months are left in that year? 4. And then add the 5. So that's a 9-month difference. So the amount of change is negative 0.02686 divided by 9 months gives us negative 0.0032 per month. This is a division problem. We wish we could get that tight, right? So the differences for all of our analyses, all the differences going all the way through, some people like to go all the way back and do a double check. And what they'll do in that case is they'll take the earliest to the most recent and see if it's in line with the same trend and supports the trend you have as a double check. That's another thing some people will do. But if we just consider those actual amounts per change, percent changes per month, the range is negative 0.32 to negative 0.35. And that gets us to the appraisal date. So there is a significant amount of change that's going on that we need to acknowledge as a time trend adjustment or market conditions over time adjustment. And so we can anywhere within negative 0.32% and negative 0.35% can be used and justified within this example. So why not cut off the edge and balance it out? Negative 0.3% per month. Or you can go, depends on how far your system goes, you usually have something within your system that is actually appropriate, how you round. And so at this point, you'd be reasonably to say that there is a negative trend of negative 0.3% from my paired cell analysis. So what do you need for paired cell analysis?
Some advantages to the paired cell analysis technique include many Colorado counties generally have sufficiently closely comparable sales. The rates of change calculated this way are relatively easy to understand and explain. Some disadvantages to paired cell analysis that should be noted include subjectivity is needed to determine the physical characteristics versus the time-based contributory value adjustments that may be needed. What constitutes closely comparable sales and sold properties must be clearly defined proactively and prior to the analyses. And it is difficult to account for any nonlinear trends that may exist. This is where we begin our case study work. So please pause the video at this time if you'd like to complete the practice problems. The next slides will reveal the case study answers. Note that the paired sales and property resale analysis techniques both involve similar processes. Since the remaining related problems in this video are very similar, you may simply use the provided case study answers to answer any of and to make sure that you understand the basic concepts and equations.
The main thing for this exercise is that you kind of see how it's done. And that way, if you do choose to do it within your county as a check, because a lot of times it's not the primary way that you're going to do it in mass appraisal. It's a cross-check if you have the data. Or if you have unique properties, fairly unique within your county, that you have to use your best information you have available, and that's the way you're going to establish that. So a lot of times that's where paired sales is most effective in mass appraisal and in the assessor office. Okay, so then when we get this information, and I'll hand out an answer sheet, so if you didn't get them all, we'll get you all corrected up at the end. The range is negative 0.0018 to negative 0.032, if you look at what we have here. And then lowest to highest, and then the difference would be the actual range. The median is negative 0.024, because you line up high to low, low to high. What's the two middle ones you're going to have? Negative 0.25 and negative 0.23. Add them together, divide by 2, negative 0.24. And then the rounded mean is going to be, if you add them all up and divide by the number of numbers, you're going to come up with negative 0.0025. So this gives you some statistical measures that you can use to justify what you finalize your unique property value or your unique base to. And the information supports an overall negative trend of negative 0.0024. It's your median, which is a nice number. It's also really close to where your mean ended up.
So
Anything within the allowable range would justify by appraisal knowledge and base can actually be a documented, well-documented, supportable source. All right, so property resales. Going back to the materials on page 6 of section 2. Now the great thing about this is it's apples to apples. It's the same property. selling twice within the data collection period. The problem is that doesn't always happen, and when it does happen, what other issues might we have as appraisers with the same property selling more than once within a few months in the data collection period? Yeah, a lot of times someone flips that house, and when they flip that house, they don't just buy it to resell it. They buy it and they make improvements or things they think will bring additional market value. And so maybe it isn't apples to apples when it sells again, right? And then you have to make some subjective calls as to what changes they made, building permits hopefully pulled, and you know what the actually adjustments they've made. And just because they invested $20,000 to add a garage doesn't automatically bring that back in the market. And so then you have to make adjustments to what they've done. And so paired sales, if it flips and it's the same house just a couple months later, that's not too bad. But if there's additional adjustments that need to be made, there's subjectivity, and that becomes potentially a problem that mass appraisal we don't always capture, where fee appraisers may have that data. And they don't always actually declare it either. All right, so apples to apples, we're looking at the paired sale analysis, specifically looking at the same property selling more than once within the data collection period. When we're looking at sales ratio analysis, we're actually going to take the most recent or most representative sale and discount the other same property sales that have occurred, because we assume that that property that sold the closest to our appraisal date is most representative of the market if they're all qualified and verified. But in paired sales, we're going to look at all the different ones and try to balance out what the market will pay more for or less for, and changes, physical changes and adjustments that happen between the two to get them back to being the same within the market participants' eyes. So what do you need? Similar paired sale analysis, you need 2 or more sales of the same property at different times in your data collection period. That's the other problem we have, is we have a data collection period. A lot of times that first sale may happen in data collection period. The next one is more recent and outside of our current data collection period. So we may not be able to actually utilize it for that time period. So 2 or more sales are required, qualified verified sales, same property in our sales confirmation program. Sale date of each property. Some of the advantages or some of the specific steps we need to be aware of include they have to be the same property. They need to make adjustments to the most current sale prices to account for any physical differences between the sale dates, which we've been talking about. Don't always have the data to do a great job there. We array and adjust the sales from the oldest date to the most current date, closest to our appraisal date. We determine the common unit of comparison. The great thing is if they didn't physically add on, you could use the actual sale prices. You don't have to do that extra step if it's the same property with no physical changes. Calculate the actual dollar per unit and percent change of the units between each sale. Divide the percent change amount numbers by months between 2 sales at a time, and then array the monthly percent change from the low to high and select the appropriate percent change per month to utilize. So once again, we're going to go ahead and go back into our example, and let's go through our example on how this would work. On page 9 is where this example is in section 2. Okay, property 1 sold for $67,000 on June of 2012 in our data collection period. It also resold then for $79,000 on January 1st, 2016. So a little less than 4 years later, it resold, and it went up. The price went up for $12,000 difference. Property 2, $74,000 in July of 2013, $80,000 in March of 2015, so a little less than 2 years, and it went up as well by $6,000. Property 3 sold for $49,000 in September of 2011, and then in January of 2015, it sold for $56,000, so another $7,000 increased in qualified verified sell price. So we're going to use this information to go ahead and market those off, each of the properties within the same subclass of property and hopefully same economic area, so we can analyze this. And so for property 1, lot 1, we're going to take the information, we're going to go ahead and get what the difference in the sell price is. It's going up, right? So you take the highest price, subtract out the lowest price or the earlier price, and you have $12,000 increase. We're going to figure out how many months have passed between the two. First one, the most recent one sold in 16, January. So what's the difference in years? It'd be 4, and then it's additional, right? So when you look at this, actually it's less, right? So we have 4 years, but it's actually less because it's June. So we have 4 years would be what, 48 months? Less the 5 would give us 43 months. However you can best do it, some people break out the calendar and say, whatever works for you. You got to establish your own system for that. So the difference is $12,000 that was paid, most recent date, divided by the earliest sale price, gives us the amount of difference in decimal. We're going to divide it by the number of months that have passed, which is 43 months between the two, and come out with the change per month. It's 0.42% increase per month for this specific resale. Going to resale number 2, do the same thing. We're going to take, what's the difference? It's an increase in market, so we're going to take the 80,000 minus 74,000, increase of $6,000 between the dates. We're going to figure out what the difference is. It would have been 2 years, which would be 24 months, but it's actually less. So however you want to do that, I usually would take that and get the difference. So what is it? How many more days do you need to get into that? Does everyone have a system to get to the 20 months? Take the years, and it's less than that, it's 4 less. So 24 minus 4 would give me 20 months. Take the difference, which is $6,000 more paid, divided by the earliest sale, gives us the amount of change in decimal, divided by the number of months, 20, gives us the amount per month. So 0.1% increase per month. We take our final sale, do the same thing. So we're going to take the difference between them, which is $56,000 less 49, $7,000, the amount of time that passed. It's not quite 4 years, right? It's going to be 8 less than 4, so it's 40 months. The difference divided by the earliest sale price gives us the amount in decimal change, divided by the number of months, will give us the amount increase per month of 0.36% per month. Then we line up what we've discovered from sale 1 through 3, and we have a range of 0.36 to 0.42 increase per month within this data set for our resales example. Anywhere within there is supportable and reasonable, but if you go with median or mean, you're going to go right in the middle over here. And so for this, we just went with 0.4 or 0.4% increase per month. Okay. So resales advantages. Relatively free from influences other than physical condition differences, or additions that they build on to sell it for more, and other improvements they add on. Easy to explain. Say, well, this property sold here, and then it sold here. It's probably what the taxpayer is going to bring in. It's more of a resale kind of thing to try to illustrate that your values are too high. Only a small number of resales may exist is a disadvantage. You also have contributory value of physical differences that must be subjectively determined, and difficult to modify the count for nonlinear trends. Once again, if there's popcorn, this was beautiful. It all went the same direction within a reasonably tight range. But a lot of times when I've looked at this type of thing, when people have included that with their time trending data, it's been all over the place. Plus 0.4%, minus 0.24%. And so then which one's right? So before we get in the next one, what do you think is going to be more useful or helpful, and when would you use paired sale and resale in your county? When would you practically apply it for mass appraisal and assessment in your county? We've already talked about atypical, more unique types of property where there aren't really a lot of comparable sales, or it doesn't resell a lot itself. That would be one of the places where you'd use a paired sale, making some subjective calls as to what other types of property, and getting a common unit of comparison that have sold. Because we still want sales to support our valuation for some of these atypical properties. If not, we may have to get the land value from market or from another source, and then also add in a cost approach if it's an industrial commercial to come up with our valuation. So there's other ways. Atypical properties. Commonly sold properties. It's a verification of what our sales ratio analysis and our multiple regression is going to yield. So it's to verify and maybe even to simplify during an appeal. Because if you show them multiple regression, this is what my computer gave me, look at the sheet. Yeah. See, it's right. What are they going to do? They're like, yeah, right. Let me go to the next level. And it costs everyone time and energy. So you want to make sure that you resolve it at the lowest level of appeal, especially if they have legitimate, reasonable evidence, and you can make adjustments. Sometimes they may bring in stuff that actually is better because it's a unique property that you really only have maybe one of, maybe you've only looked within your borders. Maybe they looked at a comparable county that you haven't looked at yet. And maybe that taxpayer, tax agent, tax rep brings something in you can utilize. So you want to keep an open mind during appeals because it can help you long run with your limited resources and making sure you truly get the market value and uniformity in your county. Any questions on paired sales and resales? Where will you have the biggest potential problems in actually applying those? What are the biggest problems with the formulas that we just went through, the computations? Probably making sure you get consistent in how you determine the amount of months, right? That's one of the biggest ones, even more than the amount change in decimal. Rounding is a big issue in a lot of counties. Make sure if you have a rounding convention, you stick to whatever your county's rounding convention is. The state auditor and state board don't have rounding conventions you have to stick with, but you should be consistent with how you do that within your county. Okay, sales ratio analysis. Sales ratio trend analysis. It's a market-based statistical method. This is on page 11 of section 2. It utilizes linear regression or simple regression analysis. And objective is to determine the percent rate of change. Some of the things we need to be aware of. It's based on use or class, which we should have as of January 1st every year, every property in, and by specific economic areas, containing at least the recommended 30 sales. Once again, statistically required. Even if you don't have 30, you have to come up with a value for every property, every reappraisal cycle, using your best information regardless. But if it's one of the main classes of property, vacant land, residential, industrial, commercial, we need to do the best we can to see if we have 30 qualified verified sales to utilize for sales ratio analysis and in our multiple regression analysis system. Some of the assumptions we need to be aware of. We're assuming that the sales ratio trends are based upon confirmed arm's length sales prices. So real property only when we're dealing with this. We're also assuming that the actual values are used to calculate the sale ratio must reflect the same level of value. What's our measure of level of value? Central tendency, median sale ratio. They have to be same level for the same class, subclass of property. The data collection period used in the analysis must contain a minimum of 18 months and a maximum of 60 months. And we have specific dates in statute for each reappraisal cycle. The reappraisal cycle we're looking at here is the 2017 assessment date, 2018 assessment date. That means June 30th, 2016, going back to January 1st, 2015, and then in 6-month increments as far as is necessary to get the sales you need for these analyses, meaning 30 or more verified, qualified, confirmed sales. There's a minimum of 30 sales needed within each sampling, and hopefully it's representative of the population you're pulling it from. We don't control, unless you're a buyer and you're buying all these properties yourself, you don't control the sales or the sale prices being paid. The market dictates that. But you have to make sure it's all real property only and specifically within the appropriate class of property that you're looking at and within the data collection period. Remember to remove the least representative resales and duplicate sales. When we're looking at this type of analysis, we only want to give the weight of that sale, of that property, once within our data collection period. Like I said, the other resales can actually be used as a check system rather than part of the sales ratio analysis. An example that we have on page 12 in your books is section 2. We have 54 sales that have occurred. We call them observations in this case. The significance of T is a test that's performed within sales ratio analysis to determine whether the trend that's being measured is reasonably strong and able to be actually applied. So if the sig T is a certain level, and we'll talk about what they actually mean, it'll tell you whether to apply the trend or not apply the trend, and it gives you a confidence level in the trend, applying it or not applying it. Then we take our X coefficient, also the beta, divided by the constant, and we try to calculate specifically the amount of trend if it is the sig T is low enough. The significance of T and what it actually means on page 13. If the sig T is between 0.0000 going out and 0.049999 it is actually deemed a significant trend, and it means that you're 95% or more confident that it should be applied, that it is a strong trend that should be applied based upon the data sets that you've run. If the SIG-T is between 0.05 and 0.1, you're between 90 and 90, almost 95, 90 and about 94.9% sure that there is a borderline trend, meaning there may be a trend, but it's not strong enough for you to stand behind. And then if it's greater than 0.1, you're less than 90% sure that there's a trend, then you're not going to apply it. We're going to say it's an insignificant trend that shouldn't be applied. An example that we have the 54 observations that occurred. The SIG-T, when we ran our statistical analysis, came in with 0.001, which means we're over 95% sure that there's a strong trend. And then we're going to use our constant and our X coefficient. And the formula is basically taking the X coefficient, which is determined in decimal, divided by the constant, and it gives us an amount in decimal of trend that we're going to acknowledge. In this case, since the SIG-T is once again giving us a 95+% chance that it is, in fact, a trend that needs to be acknowledged and represented, we're going to take that X coefficient of 0.0015 divided by 0.984 and come up with 0.0152 or 1.52% per month increase in trend. We use the signs that are associated. If one of these had been negative within our analysis, then it would be a negative outcome and a decrease in trend. So in this case, specifically after running our analysis, this is the information that came up. We have 1.52% per month increase in trend. Some of the disadvantages to this is you're less concerned about stratification. You have more sales, more information required, more verified, qualified information, so you're less worried about the specifics of each property that you would be in paired sales and resale analysis. Nonlinear trends and changes can be determined. Remember how I talked about the popcorn with paired sales and resales? If it's high, low, you have maybe 3 of these, and there's one's going high, one's going low, one's in the middle. What do you believe? Well, this puts it in a linear fashion and graphs it for you, so you can actually see if the trend is consistently going up, consistently going down, consistently right in the middle, or you can see where it goes one way or the other. There are times where you can do a mixed trend and you can do a split trend. If you have enough data, enough confidence in that it really represents the market, what you can do is you can actually have a spline trend. A spline trend is where it goes a certain direction and then it shifts dramatically. And at one point you may apply 5 months or 6 months worth of upward trend and 10 months of stagnation based upon what your data is telling you. So it's a useful cross-check tool against other techniques, including multiple regression analysis. Many counties will do multiple regression, including all the characteristics that are captured in their system, to see what adds, detracts, and how much. Time can be one of those characteristics that's measured. And so you can cross-reference and check it. Some of the disadvantages: actual value must reflect property characteristics, updated information. Mass appraisal is a beautiful thing. A lot of sales is great. Problem: not always accurate. We still have limited resources to verify. Our sales confirmation programs at best are not always 100% accurate and up to date. We use our public sources of information, what the taxpayers have filed, the transfer declaration, the transfer documents that we receive, and we hope that it's correct. Unless we get an appeal, then we look deeper at each of these. The actual value must be reflect the current market values as of the previous appraisal date. The sample used must be representative. So you have to have a representative sample. So when I'm talking about the actual value, that's the assessor's value that you're using from the previous reappraisal cycle. That's the June 30th, 2014 value that you had. Remember what we said? What are the flaws within looking at that? You don't look at every sale from the last reappraisal cycle and you don't re-examine it. You assume that it represented market. A lot of them have gone through an appeal. Others have not, and maybe they should have. But if it's sitting in your data set when you're going to your new reappraisal cycle and you're re-examining, you're not going back in depth on the previous values. You're assuming that's market. And you're going to use that against the current sale prices, assuming that's market. And if it's market to market, it's a beautiful thing. But sometimes one side or the other may not represent market when you're really looking at the sale ratio. That's why looking at the outlier ratios, the highs and the lows, and focusing your attentions on those will help you see if there's a problem with one side or the other of the ratio. So there's a case study problem. We're going to keep it fairly simple. Normal distribution, nice bubble, and there's a paranormal distribution for you. So let's get into this and let's look at that. Let's go ahead and look at the page 4 and 5, problem number 3. So in this case, this is actual data from, I won't share which county, but it is actual data from a couple of reappraisal cycles ago from a specific county that I performed their time trending for them on it. This was residential, single-family residential. They had a total of 886 sales. They had economic area 1, 5, and 6, and these are the number of sales that had occurred in each. Each of these had over 30 sales. Anything with over 30 to the lowest substratification is what we're going to look at for time trending, because that's going to mirror those markets on the lower levels. And so we looked at this, and we looked at per economic area base, and we also looked at overall to double check as well. And we looked at this time interval represents the X coefficient, and this is the constant. So first thing we look at, we run this analysis and does a rise over run graph, and it measures the strength of the trend as the sig t. If it's 0.05 or less, then it's going to be a significant trend. And so that's a significant trend in economic area 1. Economic area 5, it's a little above, so it's outside of even a borderline trend. And in economic area 6, when you broke this down and I double click into this box using SPSS, statistical package for social sciences, we ended up with 0.499732, whatever, so it was below. So both of these were deemed to be strong trends that need to be administered, and this economic area did not. So when we further ran the information, we looked at specifically economic area 1 since it had the strongest amount of trends separately. Sig T was well within the range to be an acceptable and necessary to acknowledge time trend. We took the specific information from that, and the constant is the X coefficient divided by the constant. So 0.0048 divided by 1.0374, and this is the actual graph that showed the increase in trend that was going on over the 18-month data collection period that they utilized. So we took the X coefficient divided by the constant, the base formula to determine the amount of change when you're using sales ratio, and it ended up being 0.0046. So if you look in your case solutions on page 5, this is the example that we're looking through and talking about. And like I said, with the graph itself, it's basically a rise over run that we're talking about here. So rise, how much is it going up or down over the run, the time period? And it measures in a linear fashion the pull of each of the specific ratios. Each of these dots, each of the little circles represents a separate sale, a specific sale ratio, okay? And so over this time period going upward, it's going to give us an increase in trend, like I said, of that amount of data. So it's increase in a 0.0046, or 0.46% increase per month, a little less than 0.5%. They ended up applying that proactively to determining a time-adjusted sell price, and that's what they utilized to check their performance evaluation when they established their new values. The division performs time trending assistance and performance evaluation assistance each reappraisal cycle for between 20 and 30 to 32 different counties over the last few reappraisal cycles. Anyone's eligible. We don't share the data with anyone, but at a certain point, if a taxpayer were to come in, because we've had a couple come in and request information, there is, unless it's covered by confidentiality provision, we do have to share it if specifically requested and if we have been given access. We generally have not done that, and we don't advertise it, but there are certain provisions that we can't ignore. So that's one thing you have to know. But we do perform it, and we give you additional information. This tells you what we need. This is from the last reappraisal cycle, and it tells you kind of what you need to do, the steps, specifically the written format we need it in, the proper form, specifically that you only get 3 submissions. So if you give us a data dump that isn't cleaned, it's not going to yield well because we only have 3 times we'll look at that data, because we may be looking at up to 32 different counties' data at the same time. The earlier you can establish it, the better, because as soon as your sales confirmation program is in place and you got it all straight and you're going forward, we can help you out as soon as you feel confident in your original information and confirmation. On handout 3 has additional information. This is based upon the last RFP, the last contractor, Wild Rose. Every 2-year cycle, the audit is put out for bid, and this is basically what the last auditor had put in as part of the plan. And basically the RFP is the request for proposal. It's a contract between the Legislative Council and potential bidders for private industry to come in and go ahead and take on the audit. So they have to put in a bid for what's required, and the statistical requirements are outlined within this part of the RFP. All right, conceptually, let's look at multiple regression analysis. We don't have your MRA and your systems, and every county is going to have their own system going on, maybe a vendor-oriented system. But what does the system do that you need to look at? And so going back to page 15 in section 2, if you're following along in the book, so multiple regression analysis is going to look at multiple different features. It's going to have independent variables, several independent variables compared to one single dependent variable. What do we care about? What would be our single dependent variable in multiple regression analysis? The value, right? And so we're going to look at the value. What's influencing the value? So anything that you've captured within your system of all your sales that have occurred, and specifically based on the class and type of property, should be in there. And what you want to do is, when you qualify verify it, you make sure that that data is correct. And so we're going to look at the total market value versus all the different factors you put in, including time as a potential independent variable. It's not usually the primary method, but it is a method that can check a sales ratio analysis to make sure we're in the same ballpark for specific classes and subclasses. End result, when we look at our performance evaluation, we look at the big picture. This is the final statistics that the auditor considers. This is the final statistics we can consider when you set your new values. What we will do is we look at ratio studies, and we're specifically going to look at the median sale ratio for our entire classes of property, all of your vacant land throughout your county, all of your residential throughout your county, all of your industrial commercial throughout your county. Those are the 3 that have to be examined for state board requirements. So we're going to look at all of those with your new values on the ratio, okay, versus your time adjusted sale prices on the ratio. And those are the final end result. With time trending, we're not there yet. We're still looking at your previous value compared to specifically, you know, what's changed in the market and what you've captured in your system and what shows a strength within multiple regression. It's like multiple sales ratio analysis based upon independent variables, again, and seeing how they influence and impact your specific values. So they will come out with percentage strengths of influence upon your value. Time may not be one of the top 3, and depends on the type of property as to which ones will be in there. And so anything you put in there that you think influences value that your county appraisers are constantly updating your system with should be considered. And multiple regression will give you a strength to which one most influences value, and then it'll give you an amount of adjustment potentially to consider. Okay, so for time trending, it is one of the things that we look at. Some of the typical ones we have: independent variables, size in square feet, location, age of the property, and other physical characteristics depending on the type of property and use. Another great thing about this, similar to sales ratio analysis, it can develop a nonlinear adjustment, so it doesn't have to be absolute. It can say for a period of time, yeah, that added to value. But then at this point in time, if I have enough data, maybe it no longer was a factor. Okay, or maybe it didn't influence value as much at a certain point. And so it can go up and down and be a little more popcorny, and we can figure out at one point in time it adds or detracts and how much. So some of the advantages: it allows for analysis of large amounts of data, which is what we should be collecting at all times. It easily manipulates data to test theories and hypotheses. So you can actually put in your new values and you can test it against your MRA. You can test it to see if it actually makes sense and it's coming in with where those sale prices have been coming in. Contributory value of multiple property characteristics can be tested. We've named a few of those. Think about the types of property you work with. What else are you capturing in your system? All of those can be tested if you consistently capture them in your system. Multiple regression analysis can include nonlinear relationships within and between property characteristics. So maybe a combination of two characteristics may have a stronger influence upon values than one separate. And you can even say extra garages. You can say extra square feet. You can say age of the house being improved, maybe upgrading a certain house component. Some of the disadvantages to be aware of: they may produce unreliable results with small sample sizes. So once again, you have less than 30, anything like that, you may not have the strength. Bring it to an appeal. It seemed voodoo-like because people don't understand it, and it's hard to explain, oh, this is all the data we've been collecting, and here it is, and here's what the computer kicks out. Taxpayers like, yeah, gotcha. That usually leads to higher level appeals. Requires greater knowledge of statistics to apply it consistently. And last but not least, since multiple variables are considered, time cannot be easily separated because it's influenced by the other variables that you've captured in your system. So if you have a time adjustment that from any of these methods specific to a class or subclass of property, this is how you determine a time adjusted sell price. The formula is you take your adjusted price, qualified, verified sale price that you had for real property only, you multiply by 1 plus the R, which is the rate of change that you've acknowledged in decimal, times the time interval amount. And when we look at this, the task for time adjusted sell price is equal to the adjusted sell price, okay, and then 1 plus, it's the rate times the time amount. This is the tricky part. You have to be consistent with how you put your time interval in there. It's going back from the June 30th appraisal date, how many months have been represented within that, but we discount consistently. We go with an 18-month time period, we're going to go ahead and go 17 is what the number will be. If it's 24-month, we'll have 23. We do that because the last auditor that really held us accountable to a consistent method, that's what they did. Rocky Mountain used to do that, and so we tried to mirror the auditor. Since Wild Rose has taken over, they've said, however it is, be consistent. As long as you're consistent with what you do, sound appraisal reasoning, we're okay with you doing it that way. So right now, we will go with this as a primary way of doing it, discounting 1 month from the data collection period. But if your county does it a different way, we'll do it consistently, but you have to be able to justify it, what you do and how you apply it. Do you feel like this yet?
Thank you for watching our presentation. We hope this format will benefit you in your work for ad valorem taxation. If you would like to provide any feedback or have any questions about the course, please contact the Colorado Division of Property Taxation.